Hey guys, let's have a quick look at another deck. And this one was sent in by Tyranno. It's a Swedish general deck designed for 1v1, 2v2 and 10v10. He writes about this deck that the armored ground vehicles are the main force of the deck. So we're looking at a large amount of tanks in this situation. They're going to be backed up by infantry in forests and towns and the planes in the air. The few cheap and light units like the Rover RBS or some infantry units are meant to spread over the map and be a bit of mass. Now, you don't see many Swedish decks, but don't underestimate them, because they can be really effective in the right hands. Now, that goes for any deck, but the Swedish infantry and the Swedish units are very well rounded. So don't just discard these and go for a standard Scandinavian deck, because you will be sacrificing activation points. And having a general Swedish deck also gives you a bit more availability. And you can immediately see that in, for example, the command infantry. Normally you have 3, and this deck has 4. Command infantry are really nice, especially if you have them in a chopper like this, because you can deploy them all over the battlefield in positions where other vehicles either might not be able to go, or might not be able to stay hidden. So good choice here going with a infantry command. Next up, a FOB and an HKP-4A logistics chopper, and closing up with a command tank. Now, not the best command tank, but 150 points for a pretty heavily armored command vehicle is not bad. If you have some more contested areas, bringing in one of these will make sure that you have a better chance of holding it than if you were to bring in, for example, the Strip BV-3020, which only has 2 armor on the front and 1 on every side, versus, let's see, where is it? The 103, which has 12 frontal armor, 4 on the side, 2 on the back and 2 on the top. Infantry, he has the Kustjäger 90. Very nice infantry, these guys. They got pretty high armor penetration. For an elite force though, I would expect their accuracy with that ATGM or with that law to be a bit higher, because 45% is quite low. Now they carry a large amount of these. They're a 15-man squad and they can carry 12 of these rockets with them. So you have more chances to actually take a shot at the enemy, because normal 15-man groups carry, say, up to 8, sometimes even 6 of these rockets. But these guys have a bit of chance to actually hit them, and of course you do get a veteran bonus with these, which will give you a bit more availability or a bit more accuracy on these. He's flying these in an HKP-4Cs, and these units are good to deploy them early on in the battle. They're also a sort of quick stopping force. These halos travel at 270, meaning that you can quickly get them into position. And they are so versatile that I definitely want them in a general deck. Next up, AA Infantry is the RBS 90, and he has these in the amphibial transports. As far as I'm concerned, AA Infantry should be pretty cheap, and especially the transport is something that can make it expensive. For example, if you were to pick the STRAF 9040, which is a really good AFV, you're going to be paying 25 points for the vehicle, making it one 15-point combined unit, which is pretty expensive. So using these in the amphibial is good enough. I am, however, a bit worried that there are not enough of them. So personally, what I would do is go back to 8, and especially since this is a general deck, you don't know what you're going to be up against. Say you're up against in Wonsan Harbor, you want to have multiple groups of these, because they'll either take mortar fire, artillery strikes, airstrikes, or just come up against infantry and get knocked out. And if you only have 5, that is a bit on the low end. RBS 56 are units that I personally don't bring that often, and the reason for that is that they have a really low range on those ATGMs. They have exactly the same range as most standard tanks, 2275. So the moment that you start to take fire, or that you are in range to fire, you will also take fire. Will reduce in stun damage, panic damage, or any other sort of damage to this unit that is going to make this missile miss the target. So I usually don't take these because they don't add a whole lot. Yes, they have a lot of armor penetration, yes, they got good accuracy, but I just don't think that they are good enough to warrant a place in this deck. Next he has 2 cards of Panzerskeiten 90. I would go with a bit more variety. The 1940 or the 9040 STRF is definitely something I want to have in here, and preferably in higher quantities. So what I'm going to do is use the Panzerskite 90 as my holding force. They have pretty average, okay-ish specs, and I can deploy the infantry and then take the transport, the 1940, and go with it to support tanks or other fighting vehicles. And the other 3 points that I just freed up here, let's see, we're also going to delete this one because 16 should be enough. I want to get the Norrlandsjägare in here. Now if you compare these to the Kustjägare, you're going to see a small difference, in the sense that they are still a 15-man squad, but they don't carry the same AT weapon. They got a recoilless rifle. Now they can only be used against vehicles that don't have an HE value, but they are slightly cheaper while still being very effective. They are a shock troop, so they are pretty heavily trained, and accuracy on these weapons is really good. So these are a pretty general and pretty versatile force, with not the best choice in AT weaponry, but it works. Of course, having 25 armor penetration is way better than 12, but I have found these units to be quite effective, because they are harder to kill than standard infantry. Now, those being pretty much the pushing force, I'm going to try and get those in as cheaply as possible, while still having a decent transport. And the XA-180 is the unit that I'm going to use for that. The XA-180 has a bit more armor than the Amphibial. It has 2 points of frontal armor, 2 on the side, 1 back and 1 top. And it is pretty fast amphibious, so that makes it a more versatile unit. So we're going to take 10 of those. I might be able, or I might come back to this section later, but for now we have 42 units of infantry and that should be enough. Now in the support category you get the AMOS. AMOS I always go with 5 because they already have really low dispersion for a mortar. And I personally use mortars mostly to stun a larger area or put up smoke screens, and for that I need a bigger dispersion, not a smaller one. Another reason that I'm taking 5 is that they only carry 42 rounds, and that means that you're going to run out of ammo because they fire 2 rounds at a time. They're a dual-barreled artillery unit, and I believe this is the only unit in the game that has that capacity. These mortars are also surprisingly survivable. They have 4 frontal armor, 3 side, 2 back and 2 top, but I wouldn't use them in any other role than a mortar because they're too expensive to do so. And they don't have the capacity of reliably taking out ground vehicles with their, say, ground-to-ground AMOS direct fire weapon, because it's only 25% accuracy. But you are getting a 14% or 14 point armor penetration, so if you really get lucky with these things, you might even be able to hit a tank and destroy it. LVKV-90s are pretty good AA guns. They are radar guided, so keep that in mind as you're going to use them. They will get targeted by seed if you don't turn them off. And these things you get in pretty high numbers. You can get 10 at trained or 8 at hardened, and I definitely agree with 8 of these. Also going to go with 8 of the RBS 70 or RBS 76, 67 Hawk. Not the best version of the Hawk. As with all Hawk variants, keep them on the road, because that off-road speed of 35 is really painful to watch, and it makes them pretty much a sitting duck. Especially once you start taking artillery fire, and that is something that happens with these things. Next unit that he has in here is the Rover RBS 70, and this is a good AA unit. They're 35 points, they got 2800 meter range, decent accuracy, carry 6 missiles, and they're nice and fast, as well as being small, which helps them stay alive, because the smaller a unit is, the harder it is to hit. Now he has 17 of these, combined with 1 RBS 90 and RBS 70. I'm going to scratch the 70 because I want to get a longer range artillery unit in there. And for that I'm going to use the Becan 1C. I'm going to take one of those, and this is going to be a sniper unit. Now the Becan 1C may look like a standard howitzer. It really isn't. This thing has a very high rate of fire of 12 rounds a minute, which is higher than your standard artillery or your standard mortar carrier, while firing a larger caliber. These things fire 155 mil versus a 120 mil. So keep that in mind and use these with their low dispersion, since they already have 4550 combined with veterancy. That'll put them at about 3700, maybe a bit less. And with a good range, you can actually start sniping high value targets. Think along the lines of command vehicles and other significant targets. This is what I would use in my support category. Tank wise, there are not that many choices, and the choices are pretty evident. You want to have the STRV 121 in this deck. Next to the Leclerc, this is one of my favorite tanks in the game, because it is a really good all-rounder. The one setback that these things have is that they don't have the frontal armor that you would expect for a super heavy. They only carry 19. And that means that all the other super heavies are going to laugh at this thing once they see it. That is, they're going to start laughing, but you can pretty fast or pretty quickly shut them up, because these will penetrate anything in the game with 23 armor penetration. Their accuracy is good, their stabilizer is very good as well, so you can use these things on the move if you have to, but I would be careful in deploying these too offensively, because they may go faster than you would like. Surprisingly, you get 2 cards of these, and I believe that's one of the few prototype cards that you get 2 of. You can see down here it's a prototype unit. Having the capacity of bringing in 2, I would definitely go with Hardened, and that's something that Tyranno also went with. Doing this will make it a lot more survivable and more accurate. 103Ds are these peculiar looking Swedish tanks, but don't underestimate these, because they have a very high rate of fire for a tank, not the best accuracy. A stabilizer is nowhere to be found, because these things don't have a turret and have to turn the entire tank in the direction of the target. But 17 armor penetration at a rate of fire of 15 will make this thing very lethal to medium tanks and higher tanks if you can shot them in the side. You get 15 frontal armor, not great, but for a 90-point tank, it's pretty good. And for the lower threats, you can always go with the 103C. Now compare these and you're going to see some slight differences. You're lacking 1 point of armor penetration, 5 points of accuracy. You don't have as much frontal armor, but you have the same rate of fire. And personally I use the 103C or the 103D combined, with the 103C being better for flanking maneuvers, because they're not the main offensive unit. They're not as survivable, and this means that they are perfect for side duties on flanks where you're not expecting that much action and where you're not that likely to deal with heavy armored tanks. Last tank is the STRV 105. Good tank. You don't hear me say that a lot about the Centurion line, but I really like this one, because it has really high accuracy, good off-road speed, decent frontal armor at 10 points, and pretty high armor penetration at 16. Unfortunately, they are prototype units, and that means you only get 1 card, but you can get 10 of these for 1 card, and I would definitely recommend putting those at Hardened and getting that accuracy in the ranges of 75 to 85%, depending on your range to target. Reconnaissance wise, you got not that much as far as options go, but the options that you do get are pretty nice. For starters, you got the Volkskomjäger Recon Infantry. I agree with this choice here of going with a standard card of infantry and going with those at veteran, because you don't really need 8 of those. Personally though, I would transport them in the HKP 4C, because the 3C only has an autonomy of 300 and a speed of 205. Pay 5 points more and you suddenly get an autonomy of 2000 and a speed of 270, as well as having twice the hit points of this HKP 3C. So we're going to go with the 4C, which will make the unit 40 points instead of 35, but I'll gladly pay that in order to get a pretty decent helicopter. Next up, you got 2 of these EPBV 90s. Don't let the 90 in the name fool you. They may look like they have an autocannon, but they really don't. They only have a machine gun, which is even a light machine gun. It has 0 armor penetration capability. It does have a decent amount of frontal armor, but what you get these things mostly for is their combination of good speed and exceptional optics, as well as having a bit of survivability. I always go with 8 of these because you don't really want to get the EPBV 3022, it's not that good. And the same goes for the L3304. These things only, they have very good optics. They're very fast at 95, but they got absolutely nothing going for them in the terms of survivability. And that's why I really prefer the EPBV 90. And finally, a recon chopper, HKP 6A. It would be great if you could upvet these to hardened, but unfortunately we don't have that option, so just take 8 of those at trained. Vehicles, we got some units which are interesting, although not that many. You can see the line down here, which is recoilless rifles and HGM's units, but again, the HGM unit only has a range of 2275, which for a 5-man infantry group is bad, because they're gonna get hit very, very easily, but at least they'll survive the first hit. For an HGM truck like this, it's even worse, because a tank will look at you, turn the turret, fire, and while your missile is still in the air, the tank is going to have killed the launching unit, which with a guided missile means that the missile will miss and you just wasted 35 points. So I really recommend against going with an RBS 56 truck. If you do want to have a tow unit in there, or an HGM unit, go with the 551. It carries ITOs at a pretty good range, and if you like ambushing, take some of these. But personally, I think we have enough tanks in there to fulfill a role similar or better than this one. The unit that I do go with is the IKV 105. If you got the stream Monday, then you're going to have seen that I did use these, and they were very effective in the right circumstances. If you have a town where you got some infantry hold up, or if you have a sort of cheap supporting force either on flanks or in your main push, with a decent rate of fire, a bit of armor penetration, good accuracy, mostly sitting still, you don't want to fire these on the move, then the 105 is the good unit for you, because it's cheap and it has medium optics, which means that it can to some extent replace recon units if they get lost. They mostly are cheap, and that's the reason that I will keep these things in the deck, and that if I had the chance, I'd take probably another card. Because looking at the tanks, the cheapest combination, or the cheapest version that you have is a 105. Compare that to the IKV 105. You can see that they may have a bit less range, but they still have the same armor penetration of 16. They have a lot less armor, only 3 versus 10, but you're paying 20 points less. So you can almost get 2 of these for the price of 1, and really, really good supporting units. If you want to spam something, you could go with the IKV 103, but I really would not recommend this unit. If you still want to spam something, the IKV 91, which is the inferior version to the IKV 105, could be an interesting alternative, but it's inferior in so many ways that I can't really recommend it. Now, he didn't have any helicopters in there, and I think that's a waste, because a helicopter can be a really quick stopping force for an armored push, and this is pretty much the fastest HGM unit that you have, short of using aircraft. So I'm going to call in 1 card of 8. Let's see, I might be able to spend another card on helos or vehicles, but we're going to see about that later. And I don't think I'm going to spend it on the helos, because I don't really need 2 cards of these. And since you have a higher availability, you can just go with 1 card at hardened. Now, air power, we got the Gripen. 3 of these you can bring in, which are all trained or 1 elite. Personally, I would go with multiple at trained, because you can start shooting down planes pretty fast with these. They got all fire and forget, or as we call it on the stream, fire and fuck off missiles. You don't have to stay in the same place as your target in order to guide those missiles to the target. You can just fire them and get the hell out. And these MRAMs are of course the same MRAMs that you see on so many other planes. Good range against airplanes, pretty good accuracy, but HE is only down 5, so you're going to hit a target at least twice before it's going to go down. And if a target has armor, say like an SU-25 or a B-5, you're going to hit it even more. Vigans, I wouldn't use these. The Vigan can be a sort of supporting fighter, but with 3 Gripens, you don't really need Vigans, so I'm going to delete those. The other Vigan, the AJS-37, they have a completely different mission profile. These are bombers, and they carry a very heavy cluster bomb, which is the Mjolnir. They got 10 armor penetration, which will damage targets from the top, which means that you can very easily penetrate almost any tank in the game, and pretty much destroy it with one salvo. They carry 4 of those bombs. They're pretty survivable, 30% ECM, good airspeed. They even carry some RBS-74 missiles or RB-74 missiles. So say that you have an unexpected helo rush and you have 1 or 2 of these sitting in your hangar, bring them in, because those missiles sometimes do tend to shoot down helicopters, but mostly on accident. The AJ-37 Vigan, not to be confused with the AJS. AJS is the cluster bomber, AJ is the tank sniper. Although it is not great in that capacity, because the RB-75 missile only has 40% accuracy and 26 armor penetration. You also get some terrible AA missiles with those. I guess they still had those lying around, but they're really quite terrible. The thing is with this one is that it's a tank sniper, and I prefer to have it go in, reach out, touch a target, and get out as quickly as possible. And the way that I would personally do that is to go with a veteran unit. So I'm going to go with 1 veteran, which will boost its accuracy quite significantly, and actually not kill most tanks in 1 missile. But most people, when they're super heavy, takes a missile hit for 26 damage, they're going to pull it back and repair it, which means that you have pretty much effectively achieved the same goal, which is putting that tank out of action for the next coming minutes. The last unit he has in here is the Lansen. It's a napalm bomber, and with that you can defeat infantry quite well, but they are one-way planes. They have very, very slow airspeed of 750, 0% ECM, so the moment that these things get detected, they are pretty likely to get shot down. They have no way of defending themselves against missiles. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use them, but you should be really careful when and where you use them, because you don't want to keep feeding the enemy 75 points every time you deploy these. So if you want to go in with these, make sure you have, for example, a Gripen, which can absorb some of the fire with its 40% ECM. But the Gripen will arrive at the destination a lot faster, being 250 kph faster than the Lansen. Now, something that we don't have in this deck yet is a ground attack aircraft that can do damage with HE. And unfortunately, the only plane that we get is the SK-60B. This is one of the slowest planes in the game at only 600 kph, has 0% ECM, and the missile on it is, it may say dispersion of 0, but I've seen these things hit about 2 out of 10 times. So don't expect these things to hit, but if they do hit, you're delivering 10 HE, and especially if you have pretty good air superiority and you can pretty reliably bring these in, go for it. Personally, I think that these are slightly better than the Lansen in the sense that they are more versatile. But if you do decide to bring them in, please go with veteran, because rookie are going to make you tear your hair out in desperation, as they will just not hit anything. Now, I liberated 7 points, so I can spend those where I see fit, or as I see fit. I'm going to go with one more command, or with more infantry unit. Close enough. And the choice really is yours. You can just say, okay, I'm going to go with infantry. I want to get my HGMs in anyway, because I really like the capacity of having HGMs. Or I want to get my Stormpioneer in, because I want to have napalm troops. Personally, I don't think napalm troops are that good if they just have a flamethrower. I personally prefer my napalm troops to have something along the lines of a napalm launcher. Something along the lines of, I believe it's called the flash that the assault engineers have. So what I will do is delete my Panzerskita 90 with their STRAF 9040 and instead bring in 2 cards of Hardened. Gives me more infantry to spread around, as well as those excellent 1940s. They have a really good accuracy, 4 points of armor penetration, quite survivable. They can usually take a hit from a tank and not die instantly. And while you may think, well, they're only a 25 point unit, yes they are, but it's actually worth repairing these things, especially if they are up to elite. Because once these things are up to elite status, they have a very high accuracy, somewhere along the ranges of 80%. And you can use those as a very, very effective weapon to deter infantry from pushing up, or even punish vehicles that are pushing up, where you can shoot them in the sides. And trust me, no tank likes it to get shot in the side with 4 armor penetration, because most of them won't survive that for very long. Now, that still leaves us with 4 activation points to spend, and you can go either with another card in logistics, another card in recon, or 2 cards in both vehicle and helo. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring in another card in helo here, and I'm going to call in the let's see, this one. The M84 is a recoilless rifle. Carries only 15 rounds, but they're cheap, they're fast, and they can be used as ambushes or flanking positions. You can get 4 of these in for almost the same price as one IKV 105, but they don't have the same mission role. These things can be used on flanks as cheap deterrents. They can be used to dispose of infantry if it's out in the open. And with a 14 point armor penetration, they can do quite a bit of damage to vehicles. So you could just throw in a couple of these if you still have some points left when you're deploying your initial forces. And by doing that, you actually have a decent anti-vehicle force. That is, if you didn't bring, for example, a 103C, which is going to be way more effective at that job, but at the same time 8 times as expensive. Anyway, that's the deck that I would go with. I have played with a deck that's very, very similar to this deck that I'm showing here. And you can see that on the stream Monday, or the stream that I uploaded Monday. Link to that is in the description down below, so you can see the way that I use this deck down there. If you have any questions about the deck, leave those in the comments. If you have any comments about the deck, I'm looking forward to reading those on how you think you can improve this deck. And if you want to use it, the code's in the description down below for you to use and import. Just make sure that you don't accidentally copy any hyphens, which is the mark next to the 0 on your keyboard, because that will break the deck code. With that, end of the video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed yet, do so, because I just keep uploading more and more Wargame stuff for you to watch. And I hope to see you next time.